and welcome to another episode of DEIB Small Talk. This is a new year, and I'm excited for this year, 2023, because I know it's going to be a great year. Today, we have with me a topic, and of course, a speaker. And today's topic is leveraging DEI talent. And we'll be looking into retention in IT staffing and recruitment industry. Today, I have with me an amazing guest. But before I bring him on board to introduce himself, let's see who our guest is. Let's meet our guest. Let's meet Brandon Wings. Brandon launched his career with Insight Global, and that is the second largest talent solution firm in the country. That is in the United States of America. And he began as an IT recruiter, and in less than a year of being in that role, he was promoted to an IT accounts manager, where he provides consulting services to a diverse portfolio of clients, ranging from global corporations, Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies, and smaller firms. Within the same year of his promotion to accounts manager, Brandon was promoted two more times, adding two additional roles to his current role. Today, Brandon is or he serves as an IT account manager, the regional diversity, equity and inclusion advisor, and ESG lead. We have more information on Brandon, and I'll just let this stay for a while for those who will be watching later so you can read. You can pause this and read. But in the same light, I will bring on board my speaker.
Hello, hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy Friday. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? I'm so excited you're here today. I'm
Yes, I'm
really
so happy to
excited.
be here. Honored to be here.
Yeah, you're supposed to be here last month. That was last year. That
Yes,
was 2020, and I'm glad your family is okay. It was postponed due to family emergency, but I'm glad that we're able to have this session today. Are you excited?
likewise. Yes, I'm very, very excited. Usually my Fridays are slower in my role. So today, this is definitely spice things up. I'm excited to be here.
I am too. For those who are listening, my name is Florence and I am the host of DEIB Small Talk. Today is a special edition anyway on talent and business. I have with me Brandon Wings. I will let him introduce or reintroduce himself now. But I just want you to know that if you are listening or joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you are one of our constant audience, we do appreciate it. You can follow us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. Yeah, on Instagram. Yes, on Instagram.
All the
And of
things.
course, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's Bavarde Talent Solutions. And of course, you can follow me to Florence Idowu and our host branding. I'll be sharing the link towards the end of the conversation. Okay, Brandon, let's reintroduce you to our audience.
I love it. Yes. Hi, everyone. So, as Florence mentioned, my name is Brandon Means. I am currently in a triple role here with Insight Global. So, I launched my professional career with Insight Global right out of college. And it's kind of a unique story on how I started here, but started as an IT recruiter. And just a fun fact, everyone in our company, including our CEO, started as an IT recruiter, and you pick a path from there. So from there, I went into IT account management, where I was client facing. And then within that same year, we launched our DE&I division where I became a regional DE&I advisor, where we're doing consulting services for our clients as well. And then most recently added ESG to my plate as well as a lead for our Houston social impact initiative that we're doing called Be the Light Tour, which is a mobile career readiness sort of like workshop. So we're going to 10 major cities this year, hopefully growing that next year, where we're providing more equitable opportunity for underrepresented groups through career services and resources. So it's going to be a massive event here in February, and we're very, very excited for that.
I'm really excited for you, Brandon. And one thing that actually intrigues me, or one thing I'm very curious on, is how did you start your journey? Because I know I went through the portfolio, your background. I didn't read it all, and I know it's quite a lot. I didn't want to take your time. I want us to have more conversation today.
Yeah.
But I know you studied business administration and management. How
Mhm.
did you get into IT recruitment? Let's start from there.
Yeah, I love this question because it's honestly kind of funny. It kind of just falls into my lap. And it's so funny because whenever we talk internally at Insight Global, most of us didn't even know the staffing industry at all. And so when I initially started my collegiate career, I was dead set on going to medical school. I actually started in biology. And was studying biology until about my junior year at LSU. And then just randomly woke up one day and was like, I have a passion for people, but medicine was not what I wanted to do long term. And I think I learned that when I went to a medical trip in Haiti and Dominican Republic. I spent about a month there. And I really enjoyed the service piece of medicine, but I didn't think that I had the emotional capacity to be around sick people all the time.
Mm.
It was a lot for me to take in, and so I knew that I was passionate about people. So I ended up my junior year of college switching over to business. And to be very, very frank, I didn't really have a direction on where I was going to go with that. And so I kind of played on being passionate for people and wanted to kind of get into like a sales role. So I took some sales classes, was going to do medical sales. And then Insight Global actually reached out to me while I was still in my senior year at LSU. And I was like, okay, I didn't know a whole lot. And it was one of those things where, I was started reading about the company and interviewing here and there. We had about 3 or 4 rounds of interviews at the time. And so it was one of those things where it almost sounded too good to be true. So I was a little
Mhm.
reluctant at first, knew nothing about IT. I had no background in IT whatsoever, and definitely didn't have a background in staffing other than some like recruitment things that I did at LSU as like an orientation leader and things like that, but vastly different from what I'm doing now. And so it was one of those things that kind of just fell in my lap. And I took a risk, took a chance, moved here to Houston, and have been with Insight Global ever since. And definitely a company that I'll retire with. There was a lot of things that I looked for when I was, going to launch my professional career. And one of those things was, really working for a company that valued what they had on their website. I say that all the time. People can put something on the website and say our mission statement is this and that, but I wanted to challenge that and see like what actions do y'all hold internally to make sure that you are upholding the standards that you have. So Insight Global was a no-brainer for me. I had 3 or 4 offers on the table, and Insight Global, after my first round interview, I took all of the other offers off the table. I didn't even know if I got the job at Insight, but this was definitely a company I wanted to work for. So it was a learning curve for me because I didn't know a whole lot about IT, like I said, but I do now, and I love what I do.
That's impressive. Should I say I'm flabbergasted?
No, I love it.
Yeah, I know the reason I asked that question is because there are people out there that are wondering how can they get into recruitment, and how can I get into IT recruitment? Because looking at the future of work, the current trends, IT recruitment, I think there'll be more need in that area because the startup organizations, companies that are rising these days are massive. So there will be need for that. There will be need for that in our IT recruitment industry. So for our audience who are listening, you've heard of Brandon's story. It doesn't matter what you study. Sometimes you can pivot to that career, that passion that you have, and that's one thing I really do with people. I do for people. I try to help them make their passion their career. And
Yeah.
let's just dive into there's something you said
Okay.
about retention, about how, no, you didn't say about retention. You said, I'm trying to rephrase it, not your word, I can say your word, but I'm going to rephrase it. You said, this is likely an organization who might retire. I believe I heard that correctly.
Say that one more time. Sorry.
This is an organization that you see a long term in the organization. You see yourself working there for a very long time. So you
Absolutely.
said you might retire, this might be the only organization right now.
Yeah.
And that is interesting, Brandon, for someone who has been in a place, you've grown like 3 roles now, and you've been in this place for some time, and you still say, I see myself here for a very long time. That speaks a lot about the culture of the organization, speaks a lot about the people in the organization and what they own, what they value. So I know I don't want the conversation to just be about Inside Global. For those who are
Or
wondering, where is it working? Inside Global, yes. I don't want it to be just about inside Glover. This is an employee. You're using my platform as an employee branding opportunity. Come on, Brandon. I like that anyways.
Oh
I
my
really
goodness.
like that. Yeah, I like that. Let's dive in. Let's dive in. And because we want to look into how we can leverage DEI talent in the IT industry and want to focus on retention.
Mhm.
So the first question that I like, or let's say the second question now, would be what is your definition? What is your definition? Because we have to understand what DEI means to you
Mhm.
or what it means to your organization, because you'll be speaking from your experience, what it means to your organization before we begin to look at ways or strategies of retention in retention. So, what is your definition of DEI and DEI talent?
Yeah, so I think most importantly, we have to define what each three of the acronym means, right? So DE&I, you have diversity, you have equity, and inclusion. I'm a firm believer that each one of these components plays a key role in business culture, right? And all of those have to be prioritized in order to be effective. So what I mean by that is you can't just have diversity without equity and inclusion. And I'll get to that later, especially when it comes to retention, right? And so when we're looking at DE&I, I would say these are three components that really incorporate your efforts on how an institution is going to create that welcoming, inclusive, and equitable environment. So your diversity to me is going to be ways that people are different. You know, it may be gender, it may be ethnicity, language, sexual orientation, neurodivergent, socioeconomic status, religion. All of those characteristics are going to make an individual diverse. The equity piece of that is going to stand for the fairness and the justice, in a way that people are treated right in an organization. So this translates to equal opportunity, equal access when it comes to those processes. And what I mean by that, I wrote an article recently about equality versus equity. And I think there's a large misconception on the difference between the two. And equity comes from putting everyone on an equal playing field, but also understanding, especially as a leader, that certain individuals need different types of access, or maybe more access or less access, in order to create that equitable playing field, right? So someone that's neurodivergent may have to be managed or give access to certain resources that someone who's non-neurodivergent needs. So making sure that your opportunities are equitable and making sure that each employee is going to reach their full potential. And then the inclusion piece of that means that everyone has a sense of belonging in the workplace and making sure that everyone feels like they can participate and that they have a seat at the table. And I think the inclusivity piece of the environment is really where things can pivot and the differences are really made. And to me, inclusivity is what drives people like myself to say, I'll be at this company long term, right? So the diversity piece and the equity piece is sort of that foundation, but making sure that that environment is inclusive is what's going to retain your people.
Exactly. That's something I like to, or there is a phrase, or let's say a sentence I like to use whenever I'm talking about DEI to avoid describing each acronym. I'd say DEI or diversity is everybody, not majority or minority. It's not about the distinction of people, it's about everybody. And when we talk about everybody, that's an inclusive language.
Mm-hmm.
That's a gender neutralized language. Because
Absolutely.
I study linguistics, and one of the things when in linguistics we talk about, or business communication, we talk about is gender neutralization. When you don't want to say e, you don't want to say it, you don't want to say she, you just use everybody or you just use they. And looking at the numbers of pronouns that we're having these days, the distinction that we're having these days, it's to me it's what is causing more division.
100%. I couldn't agree with that more.
Okay, so now I like the fact that you actually talked about every single one. So now, what would you say is your definition of DEI, or let's say the diverse talents the organization are trying to target? What's your opinion about that?
Are you asking like what I would consider a DNI candidate or
Yeah.
individual?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this could be when we're looking at like maybe a portfolio of diverse candidates, right? I think this can be more fluid in a way. So I think it's really on the front end, any community that's been underrepresented, undervalued, or historically has had less equitable opportunity, especially in the corporate space, right? So I immediately think of maybe people of color, the Latinx community, sponsored candidates, especially in the IT space. That is such a huge gap that I personally seen in staffing is the bias against candidates who need sponsorship. Justice impacted individuals is also a huge one. LGBTQ plus individuals, neurodivergent individuals. Here in Houston specifically, the veteran population, we have one of the most robust veteran populations here, and they have a large disadvantage in my opinion, in the talent life cycle, looking at individuals with disabilities. And so I think when it comes to maybe like a talent portfolio, it could be encompassing of all individuals, right? But I also think that changes a little bit when you're looking at a company's landscape or geographical location, right? So what we consider diverse here in Houston may be vastly different than what's considered diverse in Idaho, depending on what your company landscape looks like and what your geographical location. And I'll give you an example. So the company I work for, we're 85% women. So bringing on women in our company wouldn't be considered diverse because we're
Yes,
predominantly
I
women,
really
right?
like that. Diversity is actually what it means to you. What are you
Yeah.
lacking? I like
Yeah.
that. Sorry for interrupting the
No,
flow.
no, no. That was pretty much what I was saying. So I think it really depends. But on the front end, I think your portfolio can be all encompassing of anyone.
Mm. So how do you target those diverse candidates for your technical roles?
Yeah, I love this question. I think the key here is really to be creative. You have to think outside the box and you have to think outside of your traditional societal norms when it comes to hiring in the talent lifecycle. So, first and foremost, you have to be intentional when you're creating something as simple as a Boolean search, right? And so, when you're creating a search to attract this talent or to create resumes and get candidates using these job boards, be creative with your Boolean search. I think everyone kind of uses, or not everyone, but I'll say most of the time people are using just very standard basic searches. So kind of incorporating some creativity in there to attract different types of talent, but also using tools at your disposal that support equitable recruitment, meaning that you now need to broaden your range of places that you're usually using for hiring. And if there are select few job sites that you're using or advertising on, expanding outside of that to get your job roles seen by other types of professional groups. There's so many job boards and sites out there that can be used and create, a more diverse talent pool. And each one of those job sites, in my opinion, has a strength, right? So if we're looking at Indeed, that's the most well-known and probably most used in today's industry for staffing and recruiting. But outside of that, you have things like Monster, and that's tailored to a certain demographic and a certain type of skill set. And you have Career Builder, etc., LinkedIn, all of these things. You should be, in my opinion, using all of those, making sure that you're optimizing opportunity. But I think even going internally and training your recruiting teams and your TA teams and your HR teams on how to effectively recruit or diversely recruit and what those strategies look like, and then being intentional when you're creating the streamline of candidate pipelines, right? And making sure that your pipeline is diverse, and making sure that it's streamlined in a way that's going to be effective for those candidates as well. And then advertising jobs in different diverse networking groups. There's so many groups on LinkedIn and Facebook and all these professional networking opportunities. So utilize that to optimize opportunity there. And then one of my favorite and probably the most simple is referrals, especially when it comes from a diverse individual. Referrals are everything, and we know, and we've seen the success, especially here, with what referrals can do in order to expand your pipeline.
Yeah, before I go to the next questions, which we have on the screen, there's something that I really want to ask is there are difficult to fill roles. There is no organization, there is no industry with some difficult to fill roles. And sometimes hiring managers could make some ridiculous, I'm
Mhm.
trying not to say that word, but that's the best word I could, requirement. How would you, let's paint a scenario. Let's say you're feeling an hard to fill role and the hiring manager wants a diverse candidate, which we know, looking at the ratio of talent we have in the industry, is likely impossible. How would you respond to that situation?
I think that's a really good question, and I think I have always stood on the fact that honesty and transparency is everything, right? So you have to be honest, but you have to be equipped, right? So if I'm going to challenge a hiring manager, I'm going to challenge an organization to do a certain thing, right? Or they bring this to me and I know it's going to be impossible. I don't like to say anything's impossible, right? But I have to be transparent on the challenges that we're going to see, but
Mhm.
then not just saying, okay, well, here's the challenges and it's just not possible. Showing the challenges and then bringing a solution to them and say, this, I'm going to do everything I can to mitigate this gap for you. Or we need to sit down and strategize how we're going to pivot to make sure that we can fill this gap for you, right? So maybe that's, for example, it's impossible for a hiring manager. They want to attract a diverse candidate, but they have to be on site here in Houston, on site every single day. That particular skill set, maybe a developer, right? They're
Mhm.
naturally 98% of developers are not on site anymore. They can do the job remote, right? So maybe we're changing the conversation from I can't find you a diverse candidate and changing that conversation to how can we pivot to attract these diverse candidates to your job, right? Can we make this remote? Can we offer a relocation package to get this person in Houston? And really, I almost say like you have to paint the picture, right? So finding the diverse candidate that maybe not be in the location or maybe not won't be within the pay range that they have, and kind of showing the manager like, here, this is what you're missing out on. So how can we pivot where we're at right now in order to attract this talent?
Thank you. Just a quick, I just want to quickly tell this, or at least explain that this is the DEI Small Talk. And I have with me Brandon Means. We are talking about how to leverage DEI talent and achieve retention in IT staffing and recruitment industry. If you're joining us for the first time, you can let us know where you're joining from, where are you, what's your portfolio, what are you looking for, what would you like to achieve, even what topics would you like us to talk on our next show. Our shows are being aired every second Friday and last Friday of the month. That is two times in the month, and we talk about all things DEI, from talent acquisition to talent management, and of course to talent development. Subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and you'll be notified when next we have. Today, I'm still here with Brandon, and we're talking about DEI talent and retention in IT industry. Okay, now let's go to the topic we have. So, how does diversifying
Mhm.
pipelines, the talent pipelines, because that is often a phrase that, or let's say a sentence now that HR leaders, talent acquisition leaders would always use. Let's diversify the pipeline. Yeah, which we all know what it means. But how would this help retention of?
Yes. So important. Love this question, Florence. Thank you. So I think we start from the beginning, right? So once you've effectively built out a solid pipeline of diverse talent, then you can be a little bit more intentional with optimizing these candidates' opportunities in the market. So when we talk about retention, it's almost always a company's issue, not a candidate issue. That's a personal opinion, not a fact. And what I mean by that is what is an organization doing or not doing when they're incorporating diverse candidates into their organization, right? And so if your leaders don't know how to effectively manage a team of diverse individuals, turnover and retention is going to be inevitable. So I think on the front end, having the diverse talent in an organization will promote diversity of thought and perspective, which studies have shown has an incredible benefit in a company's growth, culture, productivity, even profits. So I think the baseline here is that when your people feel valued and they feel heard and they feel seen, they're naturally going to perform better. They want to be there. They want to stay with a company. They want to grow. But that starts with making sure that you're identifying the gaps and not just saying, "Hey, I want a diverse individual," and putting them in the organization, and then not supporting that diverse individual outside of just hiring them, right? And so, for me, I always tell clients I don't want to engage with a client who's just trying to check a box or meet a hiring quota. I think right now in today's age, we're seeing that trend where people are quote unquote making an emphasis in diverse hiring, but they're not understanding the stipulations that directly affect things like retention, right? So you can hire a diverse individual all day long, check that box, right? But what are you doing to support these diverse individuals once they're there? And most of the time, it starts with employee resource groups, or maybe the leader is managing a team that has never managed any diverse individuals before. It goes back to that equity piece, right? And so if those foundational layers are not in place, you're going to see a lot more attrition than you did before in in my personal opinion. And that's just trends that we're seeing in the market.
Mm. Yeah, that actually brings me to a question, just a follow up question on what resources or how would you advise first time managers? Because what you said is very valid, very, very valid. The culture of a BIPOC person is definitely, definite. I need to emphasize that definitely different from even the Latinos and
Mhm.
different from other white or other persons or the majority themselves. So how would someone who has never managed a diverse candidate or a diverse employee now be successful to achieve retention?
Yeah, I think the most important and I think you have to start with one thing, right? A manager, a hiring manager, or a company, it has to stop from the start, excuse me, from the top down, right? So you have to have engagement from your C-suite all the way down. There has to be buy-in from everyone. It can't just be one manager in an entire organization that wants to promote change, right? For a first-time manager who's maybe doesn't have any experience, or maybe this is a manager who's been in leadership roles for 20 plus years but has just never managed a team of diverse individuals. I think you have to start with the simple thing of a willingness to learn. And two, you have to hold yourself accountable to the things that you have traditionally done in the past and educate yourself. And I think that really starts with training. So before a company goes rampant and starts hiring all sorts of diverse individuals without any sort of foundation, you have to train your people, you have to train your leaders, you have to train everything from the top down to make sure that everyone understands even something as little as like DEI 101 basics, right?
Yeah.
Allyship, anti-racism, things like that,
Mhm,
before they can effectively manage a team of diverse individuals.
mhm.
And so I think the easy answer to that is just training and education. And whether you do that outsourced and you get a consulting firm to come in and train your people, or maybe HR is building out new policies and reforming different procedures on how they're going to manage that. I think it is dependent on where the organization's at as a whole, but I think 100% training is the starting point to lay a foundation down for a manager that's never experienced or had any experience with managing diverse individuals. But also promoting that diverse perspective that I was talking about earlier. Invite these people to have a seat at the table. I can learn more from. You don't know what it's like to walk, say, my shoes as a white gay male in the South, just like I don't know how to walk in your shoes as a Black woman in society, right? And so I think inviting those people to the table to not only give the perspective, but also let them participate in that training and education. You know more about anything than anyone else in a day in the life of your shoes, right? And so I think formal training is important, but also making sure that you're giving people seats at the table that can also provide a lot of education and personal experience and perspective.
Yeah. There's something that you said that I think I need to highlight, I need to shed more light on, or let them not shed more light, but highlight it. And that is sometimes organization need to move further the step by hiring diverse trainers. I
Hmm.
mean, consultants. Not everything can just be in-house. Everything can just be on the HR. Because
Yep.
if the HR doesn't have the skill set, there is nothing they can do. They can go on, try to do it, but sometimes it's good to outsource. Use experts, like
Yeah.
experts
Yeah.
in that industry. I don't know. I can't just say this. I can't say this enough because one of the things that I have noticed, even the number of engagement with outsourcing diverse leaders. I mean, diverse business owners in maybe DEI consultation, maybe even other things on training and speaking event. The number is actually increasing. And
Hmm.
that's because most diverse candidates are becoming frustrated in the way the organizations are being managed or the way management is just doing the organization. And they're now beginning to like, okay, I think it's now the next time or is the next thing for me to step up my game and stand alone. And they are becoming successful. Like I was reading a story, but I think early this month of two diverse BIPOC that started their own business and they're doing well. There's another one I read this morning that got around 150,000 business brand from Amazon. She's a BIPOC. I was like, yeah, those people are doing that. The BIPOC are very ambitious.
Yeah. I
Like
love
the
it.
most ambitious person I have met in my entire life, because I am ambitious anyways. But
Yeah.
the training or the resources, that's the right word, the resources that we have or that organizations have in place to help them grow is very limited. There was something that someone posted on LinkedIn today that I was reading. I was like, I can't really remember his name. Is a white man that posted it, but it really speaks out for is an highlight. And it
Mhm.
was like there was a picture. There wasn't much, no much conversation, no much text, just a picture of two black ladies, and they were like, "I have a dream," but they didn't spell out the dream, just a DRE, and we have the emphasis mark, three dots. And the next person, which is like management, was like, let somebody else do it. That really
Mhm.
speaks volume
Yeah.
because these people have passion, they have vision, they have plans, strategies, but they do not have platform.
Mhm.
And management is not doing anything about that. I don't want to derail from today's conversation, but I just think it's something I need to talk about.
No, I 100% agree. And even when it comes to management, I think it's what I was speaking on earlier, right? Is inviting those people to have a seat at the table. It starts there. The willingness is the first piece, right? The execution is the last piece. A lot of times I think managers and just management in general misses the meat, that middle part, right? They want to go straight from the idea to the execution and think that they can do that, but a lot of times it's like you just said, right? Outsource, bring in the experts, or bring people that have the personal experience with that, right? You have someone that's ambitious about an initiative that you don't necessarily directly identify with or maybe know nothing about. Why would you send that down to the management to execute? And I think things like that are just really important to start inviting more people to the table to contribute to things like that. And that's how we get the needle to move, right? I think a lot of times companies get stuck in this loop of having these conversations, but the needle doesn't move. There's no action behind it. And I think too, something that I've seen more recently from a management perspective and just as a consulting partner to some of these firms, when we have delegate conversations and delegate topics, largely directed around DE&I and enhancing that in a workplace and adding new initiatives and goals and new seats at the table. I know I keep bringing that up. I think the biggest gap that I personally see here is the lack of understanding or the lack of willingness, and I think it comes from fear. And I say this as a personal opinion that some of these companies struggle with having to air out their dirty laundry, right? And so in order to initiate a conversation like that, you have to have accountability and be able to speak on, yeah, this is where we're going wrong. And some of these companies and managers have a really difficult time doing that, and they're scared to air out their dirty laundry, and as a result it inhibits progress.
Yeah, there's a question I'll just quickly show on the screen, which is about how you can create and support inclusive culture, which I believe that you have talked about. You talked about the ERG groups for those diverse candidates. Sometimes it's not just about attracting them. You have to also put down together resources to make sure that you build that inclusive environment, that accommodating environment to let them know, not just feel, but also to know from actions and that they are being supported in this environment. So I'll actually skip this question, but if you want to add one or two points, I would let you go before we go to the next question.
Yeah, I think the most important thing here, the inclusivity piece in culture, can be such little minute things, and we have to change the mindset around traditional viewpoints, right? And we have to understand that it could be little small things that include everyone, right? Something as small that we do here, like we will not say Merry Christmas because not everyone celebrates Christmas. It's Happy Holidays. Celebrating Pride Month. I've worked for several companies that didn't even know when Pride Month was, right? So promoting these things that maybe not the entire company identify with, maybe your entire culture doesn't identify with, but if you have at least one person that identifies with that piece, maybe it's Pride Month, maybe it's going as a team to give back to the community and do a service day for MLK Day, things like that, using inclusive language. This all makes a huge, huge difference when you have diverse individuals within your organization, because someone that is traditionally considered an outlier or maybe one of few in an organization that identifies with a diverse characteristic, as I would like to say it, while majority of the organization may not pay attention to that, it sticks out like a sore thumb for the one person that does identify with that piece, right? And so I think, for HR leaders and managers and things like that, it could be small, minute things. This doesn't have to be a huge policy reform or a huge organizational change, but making sure that the language and the policies that you do have are inclusive of everyone and not just the white man, to be
Yes.
frank.
Just the majority. Exactly. Thank you. So we have three more questions before we go to the fun part. And one is directed to the industry. One of the questions is directed to the diverse candidates themselves, and the last one is about data. So I would want to start with the candidate aspect, which is what's the best practice? Oh, this question is quite long. So what are the best practices? You work with consultants, you work with temp workers, you also do direct placement in
Mhm.
inside Global. So what would be the best practices now that you want to give to especially the temporary workers and consultants to engage in while working in a non-diverse environment, which I know what we want to do is to make sure that it increases the stickiness, that is the retention in the industry or in the organization. What would be your advice, or what would be the best practice that you would like to give to them?
Yeah, I think if we're talking to temporary workers and consultants specifically, I would say you have to be when I want to focus on the piece that you just said about a non-diverse environment, right? So unfortunately, we're in a space in society where change has not fully happened, right? Progression has happened, but we're not all the way there, right? So I think in a way, if we're talking to our contingent worker force specifically, and we're not talking to managers, I think you have to be at some point, and this is coming from personal experience as someone who's also had to do this, you have to almost be okay with championing change and kind of I'm not going to say you have to be okay with tokenism because I disagree with that 100%. But I think you have to maybe be okay with walking into an environment and maybe creating the change and maybe creating the path to change, and kind of being the star student and coming in and saying, hey, I know that you all doubt me and I know that you have no idea how to manage me as a diverse individual or make me feel valued, and really kind of start speaking your truth in a way and kind of saying, hey, I want to spearhead this initiative. I see a gap in the environment here that I think could really help, right? And providing more value than just a skill set, right? Going in and providing value add to the company, to the organization, and to the team, and kind of just really, I'm such a firm believer that diverse individuals soar when it comes to implementing change. I think it comes from personal experience and them just being naturally disadvantaged. There's grit there that some people don't have, right? And so I think you have to sometimes be okay with that and kind of pioneering the change. But I think if we flip the conversation and we're now talking to hiring managers that have non-diverse environments, they have to be open to that, right? And not just shun someone out or shut someone out because they're saying something or bring an initiative to the table that maybe doesn't align with what they view. And you have to make sure that we're putting value on taking care of the people, right? It's so much more than a skill set. It's so much more than the quality of work that you do whenever you're looking at retention. So I think there's two sides to that conversation, but if we're talking to our workers specifically, being confident and kind of speaking up, and I think sometimes that's risky, but when you add the value there, risk isn't.
I like the fact that you said sometimes that's risky, because I was about to paint a scenario whereby I knew of this candidate, very excellent person, and she is a DEI consultant, but in the role that as a contractor, actually a consultant, the role she was playing was not in the DEI space. And each time you're talking about DEI initiative, this is what she is made of,
Mhm.
and she tries to voice out. She's been shunned over and over again. Or sometimes when she shares the initiative with a DEI consultant, and the DEI consultant goes around saying she talks rubbish, she doesn't know what she's saying, and I'm actually I'm gonna talk about this now. I'm actually working on a new show whereby I just want to have BIPOC women. I would want to talk about, why do you guys opt each other? Why do you do it? Like, why?
I love it.
Do that? Like, why? I think it's going to air around May or April, May. I'm not yet sure of the date because I'm trying to put together subject matter experts that are just BIPOC. Nobody else but BIPOC women. Like,
I
you
love
guys are, you guys say you support each other, but sometimes you turn against each other. Why? I want to know why.
it. Mhm.
Because this Two plus is a BIPOC, as in black.
Yeah.
And she goes around to going tell management she talks rubbish, and when they give reports, she gives the same report of what she was just being told.
Hmm. Interesting.
Interesting. Yeah,
Interesting.
interesting because it's very annoying. Why? So I like the fact that you came from both the candidate aspect and of course from the manager aspect because they both have roles to play in the situation. I was gonna I like the second question which I said is going to be for the organization now is what strategies would you advise managers now to employ for retention of underrepresented talent? But I think you can also speak to this.
Yeah, so I think, especially from a consultant standpoint, right? When I'm going to clients, and this is a question we get all the time, right? I think first, well, I'll say this. So, in my role specifically, right, we start from the top down at an organization. And I'm a firm believer that accountability is the biggest piece to being successful when we're talking about this question. So, I think first you have to identify the problem before we can even implement an effective strategy. So, for example, if retention is an issue in the org, I know we've mentioned this a few times. What groups are we experiencing the most turnover for and why? But from there, once you have a diverse individual in your organization, what are we doing to retain these individuals, right? Are your leaders trained on DEI best practices? Are there employee resource groups for these individuals to get involved in? What upward mobility does this look like for individuals? For example, BIPOC, right? How many people in leadership do you have that are also BIPOC? Representation matters so much when we're talking about this. And who has a seat at the table? All of these things are going to directly affect retention at an organization. And so, whenever we're looking at different types of strategies, you have to understand where your gaps are and you have to really hone in on the specifics of that, right? And I think that even goes into the talent lifecycle, right? If we're looking at gender diversity or not even gender diversity, let's look at ethnic diversity, right? And you have all of these things, right? Your leaders are trained, your um, representation is fairly good, and you have employee resource groups, right? You have a solid foundation. There's some work, there's some gaps, but you have a pretty solid foundation. You're still seeing retention. Then we have to start looking at data driven solutions, right? So let's understand where the retention is the most. That's why I bring up what I said earlier is if we're seeing a lot of retention, what percent of that is diverse individuals, and break that down even more, right? So if we're losing a lot of BIPOC women, maybe in the interview process, me as a consultant, I'm putting X amount of consultants in front of a client. 50 to 60% of those are BIPOC women, and maybe less than 10% of those are being hired. Why? It's not even a retention issue at that point. Why are we not attracting that talent anymore? It could be something as simple as a job description audit. It could be something as simple as the interview process is an interview panel of 6 men. There was no women representation on that interview panel, right? That's not going to attract a BIPOC woman to your company, let alone retain them if they are at your company already, right? So I think there's so many caveats to that question. So it's a solid foundation, but then making sure that you are taking that a step further. I think I said this earlier, and I bring this up to clients all the time: is what are you doing once that diverse individual is in your organization? It's so much more than just hiring diverse people, but what are you doing to make sure that you're retaining those people? And it starts with things like that. Making sure that those employee resource groups are prioritized, making sure that there's upward mobility for these diverse individuals, making sure that there's representation from leadership down. That really speaks to people. I know when I started at several companies, that's the first thing I look for when I walked in that first day. How many people do you have in leadership in the LGBTQ space? Because if I don't see any, then that makes me feel like my path to promotion is going to be hindered if I don't identify with the rest of leadership, right? And so it's little small nuances like that that really will drastically change the retention rates in an organization. And that's what I always tell clients. Like, a lot of times it's not these drastic changes that have to be made. It's little small things that you have to pay attention to and
There's
be
a
intentional
small,
with.
yeah, exactly. Little things, little steps, baby steps.
Mhm.
Actually, like they
Yeah.
do say that a drop of water
Yeah.
makes a mighty ocean. Mighty ocean.
Exactly.
So it's the same thing. It's the same thing with policies. It's
Mhm.
not you have to become disruptive, disruptive change agent before you actually make changes. Little changes, little tweaking. could really go a long way. Okay, you've been talking a lot about data, and which brings us to one of the most important questions for today is KPIs. And I know we have to make business cases. We business leaders are business leaders. They cannot go away from the numbers because they have to make sure that the business is growing, not just in headcount or people, but also in revenue and one of the things and in performance productivity. And one of the things that would use to measure that is the KPIs. That is I know people are now saying it's now keep people interested. It's no longer the key performance indicators, but keep people interested. So we want to look at where you what KPIs both keep people interested and, of course, the key performance indicators, and that we can use to measure retention when we're talking about the DEI talent. So I want to focus to be on DEI talent. I know you can also talk about in general, but let's start from the DEI talent.
Yeah, I think to your point earlier, right, is leaders, and I'm talking C-suite level, right? When you're looking, especially at some of these bigger corporations, they want to see the numbers. They don't care about the policy. They don't care about the procedure. They don't care about the culture. I'm objectively speaking here, right? They want to see the numbers. How is this going to affect our revenue? How is this going to affect our productivity, right? Because
Exactly.
statistically speaking, if you are seeing a lot of turnover, that honestly ends up hindering your company more than it does anything. You know, when you lose a permanent employee, you're losing probably, I would say, between, or it's going to cost you anywhere between 60 to 8% of that person's annual salary just
Yeah.
to backfill that person and retrain, etc. So I think the number piece is just as equally as important as the policy and the procedure, right? So um, personally speaking, in my role now, we use a ton of data driven reporting that tracks efforts with clients specifically around DE&I metrics, right? And I think this helps continuously hold the client accountable, but also it paints the gap, right? You know, you can't just throw money at a problem, or you can't just throw words at a problem and say, this is how you fix it. They want to understand how this is affecting the business as a whole. And so once you create a plan or a strategy, you can't implement a strategy without some sort of way of measuring those results, right? Which is where the KPIs come in within an organization. So starting internally on just kind of survey the group, right? What is the awareness and understanding of DE&I metrics within the organization? Then you can kind of start creating these specific KPIs and metrics like what percent of turnover rates are impacting diverse individuals in the organization, breaking that down by diverse communities, right? And then understanding employee satisfaction. How diverse is your leadership within the company? What does your gender pay gap look like? That's a big one. People don't love to talk about it, but it's important. What representation of underrepresented groups do you have within the company? What employee resource groups do you have in the organization? All this has to be tracked in order to understand and really measure, specifically speaking, to retention of your diverse talent. I think those are some of the core questions that you should be asking internally and looking at the data around that, right? So not just saying what representation do you have in leadership? No, what percent of your leadership from the top down is Black women? What percent of your leadership is neurodivergent? You know, do you have anyone in your organization, not even in leadership, that caters to individuals with disabilities? All of those numbers and metrics will drastically affect your retention rates because you're not even attracting the diverse talent at that point because there's no representation, for instance. So I think a lot of those things have to be asked on the front end, and it goes back to what I said earlier, the accountability piece, right? You have to have the buy-in from leadership, and they have to understand that you have to be okay with kind of exposing the gaps in the organization in order to move the needle and create KPIs that are going to stick and make a change, right? I think a lot of times we see the miss with that, where people are just kind of throwing KPIs out there, but it doesn't stick,
Yeah.
right? They're not being intentional with it. And so in turn, what's happening is it's looking like these KPIs that they're setting aren't moving the needle. So then it gets pushed to the wayside. And now, you know, you have companies who have had these DE&I initiatives for 10 years and nothing's changed. And I think it comes down to accountability, intentionality, and really dissecting the data for the company's landscape.
Thank you very much, Brandon. You
Yeah.
have been very resourceful, and I like the accountability partner because business leaders, yes, they do know what they're doing, they know the drive, they understand, but sometimes it's good to have one or two check in to make sure that the strategic plans that they have, explain in terms of DEI, initiatives and programs it's been focused on, because sometimes it's been taken over again to the next year. And this is the new year. No, this is the new year. This is not the new calendar year for most organization, but it is a new year, and I know that in this new year, organization might want to start re-strategizing on ways to achieve their DEI goals. And I know that the program, the strategies that you've mentioned would do them great, will
Yeah,
really work for them. Thank you very
thank
much. No. So now we're going to the relaxed part, which is just like additional resources. So do you have additional resources that you like to share with our audience?
Yeah, so I think for if I'm speaking to HR leaders, hiring managers, organization leaders as a whole, I can share with you, Florence. I don't know how you want to message that out, but I just wrote an article recently on equity versus equality and why it sounds like I'm just defining the two. I put in that last portion of the article a ton of resources and effective strategies, not only from personal experience, but just what we're seeing in the market with other clients. And I have a ton of organizations listed that have really mastered and effectively implemented DE&I strategies. And I think just being open to, and I hate to say it because people will always rebuttal this when I say like be open to outsourcing and being open to bringing in, subject matter experts. I know we mentioned that earlier, and the rebuttal that we always get is, well, that costs money. Sure, it does, but so does everything else in this world. And so sometimes you have to be okay if you want to enact change at a other than a glacial pace. Sometimes, it's okay to bring in those outside sources and really just educate, right? And so there's so many different resources out there. It's hard to just kind of like list off a few, but I think use what you have internally, right? Understand the gap and go to your leaders, see what resources you have already at your disposal, and then start reaching out to these subject matter experts, reaching out to these companies who have really implemented this effectively, reaching out to your DE&I leaders and kind of spearheading this to understand where and what needs to happen within the organization to get your organization where it needs to be. And I think that looks so different for every company and team environment.
Yeah, quickly, I'll just ask this question. What advice would you give to our audience or people who would listen? Because some people listen after, on how to start their own DEI journey. Maybe you're a DEI advisor with Inside Global. What would be your advice for those that would like, "Oh, I really want to be in that DEI role, I want to start that role, or I want to be in the role, I
Yeah,
want to be in the role." What would be your
I
advice?
think first and foremost, we have to understand that this is not easy work, especially if you're starting it from the ground up. It's hard work. There's a lot of challenges, but you have to be okay with that. And I think you have to, from a leadership perspective, you have to be and want to be the leader that pioneers change, right? You cannot just do things in the DE&I space in a lackadaisy way, right? You have to be a pioneer change. You have to create a new standard, especially in corporate America. I always tell people, I hope that someday my role is not needed. That is our motto with our D&I team here, is that I hope I don't have to be this one day. I hope that a D&I role is not needed because the standard is promoting D&I, right? And so right now we're in a position where you have to be okay with pioneering change. You have to want to pioneer change. You have to be willing to create that new standard, especially in the corporate environment. But I preach about accountability so much, right? Be willing to learn and educate yourself in creating these more equitable environments and really understanding what it takes. You can't just throw money at an issue. You can't just, implement one initiative and everything's going to be peaches and cream the next day. This is, a gradual change. And I think a lot of times we have to understand, or leaders have to understand, that you're going to have to speak up. You're going to have uncomfortable conversations, and you're going to probably get a lot of resistance at first, but holding those people accountable and challenge yourself to look at some of these gaps from, I tell HR leaders this all the time, challenge yourself to look at these gaps from a different perspective other than your own, and I think simple things like that is really what starts getting people to understand, like, okay, this isn't an attack on me. This isn't saying that our organization is bad. It's just saying, hey, we could use some work. So how do we do that, right? Inviting those people to the table and really understanding the accountability piece of it, but also the intentionality piece of it, speaking up on things that are wrong, and then creating the change from there and implementing a strategy outside of that.
Okay, so what advice would you want to give the takeaway I like to do the fun fact first, but let's just go to the one sentence advice to HR and business leaders.
Yeah, I would say be open. I'm always saying be open, be proactive, and be a steadfast, fearless leader in changing and implementing internal policy, right? I think sometimes people think that you just have to like we were just talking about earlier, like drastically change something overnight. It's not that, right? But you have to have someone in your organization that stands up and goes against the resistance and says, hey, this is what needs to happen if we want to achieve X, Y, and Z. So I think for HR leaders, a lot of times, and I don't think this is an unfortunate thing, but I think naturally that's always going to fall on the HR leaders, right? And the business leaders, they hold a lot of these change and policy decisions. And so I think of anyone in the company or HR leaders should be the ones that without hesitation stand up and fight for their people.
Thank you. So now let's come to the fun fact. So, fun fact about you outside of professional.
Okay. Contrary to popular belief, I'm terrified of horror films. But for 3 years in college, I actually was an actor at one of the scariest haunted houses in the country. And so I was in a horror setting for quite some time. But I will say, being on the other end of it, it was a lot more fun because I wasn't
It
the
was a
one
lot
getting
more
scared.
fun.
I got to
Yeah, I
scare
like
people.
that. I wouldn't have thought about that at all. I wouldn't have thought about that. But I love horror movies.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I will say it's a lot more fun on the other side because I got to scare everyone else. I
Mm-hmm.
was being
You were
scared.
not the one being freaked
Yeah.
out. Yeah, I really want to say thank you very much for your time, Brendan. It's been a pleasure to learn more from you, learn more about what you do, the DEI journey, and of
Likewise.
course your role in Insight Global. And to those who are listening, you can always connect with Brendan on LinkedIn. I know we used to have a session for questions. But for our audience, if you have questions, because Brendan will be following up, can also follow up offline. Yeah. So
Yes,
if you have
please.
questions, you can always share that to the chat. I really apologize for not mentioning this earlier. And of course, please do share the space, share the YouTube, subscribe right now. I want to say thank you, Brendan. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have you
Likewise.
here.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much. It was an honor. I really, really appreciate everyone's time today. And I was so happy to do this, Florence. So thank you again for connecting with me. And I know I'll see you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. And yes, that comes to the end of today's show. This is the DEI Small Talk. And today I have with me Brandon. I had with me Brandon Means, and we talked a lot about the retention and how to leverage DEI talent in an IT staffing and recruitment industry. I'd say I've learned a whole lot about the recruitment strategies and how to even attract themselves. Even when you have a difficult diversity hiring, there are strategies that you can use. If you just join in, thank you. If you have been with us from the beginning of the show, thank you. I really appreciate it. And now comes the end of today's show. Please do not forget to share this program on LinkedIn, share with your network, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're listening from, share. And of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're growing. I remember when we started this year, and now we're around 8,000 plus. So we're growing. So please continue to subscribe. We really appreciate the effort. We appreciate you being with us today. And I would say Happy New Year to everyone once again. And thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.